slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
You know, altitude training is definitely a big way for athletes to make the next jump in their marathon training. But that being said, altitude training requires a lot more recovery time. It's very difficult to be able to do the type of marathon training you want to be doing, and to be running as fast as you want to run at altitude versus if you're training at sea level. I spent a lot of time living at altitude, training and living in Colorado Springs when I was in the military. And I was recently asked by a lady who left me a comment who lives in Mexico City. So Mexico City is 7,349 feet. And her question is, she says, "Thank you so much for the clear and informative video. This was a video I made on the differences between running at altitude versus sea level." And she said, "It's just what I was looking for. I live in Mexico City and have recently become frustrated with my breathing and how I feel it's holding me back on reaching faster speeds. I've always known that altitude affects performance, but I'm training a lot harder now. For context, I ran a 3:34:10 at Chicago last year. Kudos to you, Lauren. That's awesome. And would like to Boston qualify this year. I'll need to run 3:23 flat for my age group, which is 35 to 39, including buffer. I've signed up for the Santa Rosa Marathon in August. To be kind to myself and train smart, what should I be aiming for in my marathon pace here in Mexico City so that on race day it translates to 7:45 per mile?" And yeah, to run 3:23 flat, you do need to run 7:45 per mile. So looking at the altitude differences, there's various pace calculators that you can find online, Lauren, but the equivalent marathon pace you need to be running at altitude, at where you're at, at Mexico City, again, 7,349 feet, that's 8:17 mile pace equivalent to. So if you're running it and training at goal marathon race pace at Mexico City, focus on running around 8:17 per mile pace. Okay, so that's 8:17 per mile pace. I'm trying to think of the per kilometer pace, but whatever that correlates to. Okay, you do want to focus on around between 8:12 to 8:17 per mile pace, training at altitude for that equivalent running at 7:45 per mile pace at sea level. Okay, so if you're examples of the types of training you need to be thinking about, like, again, if you're training at marathon race pace, running around 8:12 to 8:17 mile pace. If you're training at your anaerobic threshold at altitude, again, we're focusing on the altitude, the fact that you're at 7,349 feet in Mexico City. You're running at your anaerobic threshold, running around 88 to around 92% of your maximum heart rate at sea level, or at altitude is running around 7:42 mile pace, or around 4:47 per kilometer pace. Okay, so that per kilometer pace for your marathon pace is going to be right around 5:06 to around 5:10 per kilometer pace. Okay, if you're training more toward doing like intervals or really fast speed training workouts, work on getting that mile pace to be around 6:41 to 7:05 per mile pace, or around 4:09 to around 4:23 per kilometer pace, as you're doing your really fast, repeat 800s, repeat 400s, those types of workouts, repeat 200s, 300s, where you're really working on your speed. So again, that is the key, Lauren. Okay, one, making sure that be kind to yourself, because where you're living at that type of altitude, it's so hard. As I know, I'm preaching to the choir with you, having lived there, living there now. I remember back to when I was training living in Colorado Springs, I would spend a lot of time anywhere from around 6,000 feet up to 10,000 feet doing long runs, doing my track workouts. You're at a huge advantage, in my opinion, living at that type of altitude. But that being said, you have to make sure that one, you adjust those types of workouts that you're doing. Okay, if you're doing repeat, say for example, doing like 10 800-meter repetitions on the track, threshold pace should be around 350 per 800. Again, if you're at sea level, that's going to be much faster. But again, starting off at threshold, running around 350, and if you're doing much faster VO2 max type pace, you want to work around 319 to 325 pace for those 800s. Okay, if you're starting off doing 400s, again, give yourself much more recovery. If you're doing repeat 400s, it might be 2 minutes at the start of your build up. If you're doing like say 12 to 20 400-meter reps, start off around 146, then work your way down to when you're much more anaerobically fit, work that pace down to around 132 per 400. But instead of giving yourself 2 minutes of recovery, give yourself like 45 to 60 seconds of recovery. Okay? Again, this is going to vary from athlete to athlete. It's so much easier if you're training at sea level to give yourself more rest. If you're at that type of altitude where you're at, okay, the focus more should be on completing the workout and getting that intense workout in, and recruiting those fast twitch muscle fibers so that you get that goal marathon race pace that you're aiming for of 7:45 mile pace to feel that much easier for you. Okay, again, running where you're at, goal marathon race pace is going to be around between 8:12 to 8:17 per mile pace, okay? Or around 5:05 to around 5:11 per kilometer pace, okay? So keep that in mind as you're training. As you're training for your marathon, I wouldn't spend too much time running at 7:45 mile pace. Again, you can do that during your long runs. You can spend a few kilometers or a few miles during your, say, 32K long run or 20 miler or 22 miles if you want to branch that out to around 38K or so, 37, 38K. You can spend a few of those miles or a few of those kilometers even at that height, at sea level goal marathon race pace, 7:45. Okay, again, you do want to stress the energy systems of the body so that, again, you get that goal race pace to feel easier for you. But just having spent many years training at altitude too, I did have to adjust the type of training I was doing to remind myself that, hey, I'm not at sea level, okay? So I do have to adjust what I'm doing and not get bent out of shape when I can't hit the types of, or when I'm not hitting the types of paces that I know I can hit at sea level. Okay, I'm up at 6,000, 8,000 feet, sometimes up at 10,000 feet. Okay, in your case, I know you can go from where you're at in Mexico City at 7,300 feet and probably go up way above 10,000 feet in some areas. So I think those are some of the things that I want you thinking about, Lauren. A great question. Remember, if you want to translate the equivalent to your goal race pace, which is 7:45 at sea level, run around 8:12 to 8:17 per mile pace at 7,349 feet where you're at. Make sure to really focus on hydration, because with the higher you go in altitude, it's very easy to become dehydrated at such high altitudes, because the body has to work so much harder to stay hydrated. And especially when you're running at that high level, there's so much less oxygen at that height. You really have to focus on your nutrition and your overall wellness, and making sure you're getting proper sleep. Also, pay attention to staying at optimal levels in terms of your ferritin levels. Okay, the only way to find out if you're running low on ferritin, which is a component of the blood, if you're running low on ferritin, it's very hard for your cells to transport oxygen throughout your body. Okay, a lot of times runners start to second guess themselves. They think they're either not suited for the marathon distance or whatever distance they're aiming for. Maybe they're training for a 1,500, 5,000 on the track, maybe training for a 10K on the roads or a half marathon or 10 miler, and they're not performing at a very high level. They're having difficult times hitting their splits in training. They're having very hard time setting new PRs on the roads or on the track, when really it's they're running low on ferritin, they're running low on iron. Okay, so the only way to find out is to get a blood test and to make sure you tell the nurse or the doctor or the PA, whoever you're talking with, make sure you tell them, hey, I want to find out when I get this blood test. Make sure I let me know where my ferritin levels are at, and also my hemoglobin levels are at. Okay, these are components of the blood that a lot of athletes just don't know anything about, and research what this does. Okay, ferritin, if you're below 30 nanograms per milliliter, you're going to have, it doesn't matter how much motivation and drive you have, you're going to have a very hard time performing at a high level. So keep those things in mind as well, because the higher you are in altitude, the easier it is to become dehydrated and to run lower on ferritin levels. Okay, we lose sweat, or we lose iron through our sweat. Foot strike hemolysis, so every time your foot strikes the ground, you burst red blood cells underneath your foot. Females lose it through menstruation. So these are a lot of things that we as athletes just don't really think about, and I certainly didn't either. Okay, back in 2007, I was coached by Lisa Rainsberger, who was she was the last female to win the Boston Marathon prior to Des Linden winning the Boston Marathon. And I think Des won it, I think, around 2018. Lisa won it in 2 hours, 34 minutes, and 10 seconds in 1985. Okay, so it took from 1985 all the way up to, I think, 2018 for a female to win the Boston Marathon, an American female to win the Boston Marathon. So I was very fortunate to work with her. Okay, and she told me that. She's like, hey, have you ever got your blood test? Why don't you go out and check your blood and find out if your ferritin levels are low? Okay, so keep these things in mind, Lauren. I hope this is helpful for you in answering your question. I wish you all the best. If you've dropped the 3:34 at Chicago, you have it in you to run under 3 hours and 23 minutes and get that Boston Marathon qualifier. The fact that you're that high up, you're going to be dangerous compared to somebody that's training at sea level. I mean, now, training at altitude is not a guarantee that you're going to outrun someone at training at sea level, because, again, as you already know, and I'm preaching to the choir for all of you that are watching these videos of mine, especially if you're training for the marathon, you can train at altitude and still get beat by somebody training at sea level. And then vice versa. Somebody training at sea level is going to have a hard time at times outrunning someone that's living at high altitudes. Okay, again, it's just about the proper training, making sure you're hydrated, you're focusing on your nutrition, proper training, proper build-up. Longer build-up is better, 20 to 24 weeks versus, say, 8 to 12 weeks. If you haven't, 8 to 12 weeks still can be done. You can still set a PR. If you've spent probably about, between 3 and 5 weeks of easy aerobic mileage before you start that 8 to 12 week build-up, okay? It's always best to give yourself a longer time frame to have a better chance of success in your race. So I hope this video has helped for you, Lauren. If there's any other questions you have, leave me a comment below. I'll respond to you. And if any of you, regardless, any of you that are training for the marathon or other races, if you have something that's on your mind, leave me a comment. I'll respond back to you. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.